Coogs House, the Houston Cougars had a big weekend in basketball, but it appears that success is bleeding over into the football field very quickly. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, please be sure to hit subscribe down below. That way we lay the latest on Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. Appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And we're doing a giveaway every 500 subscribers. We're at almost 2,100, so hit subscribe, help us get to the next mark at 2,500. Like and comment on the video to let us know you're in that contest once we get there. If you don't know what to say, I'm talking a lot about football in the springtime. Yes, we're talking about football in the springtime. Tell us in the comments down below what your favorite flavor potato chip is. And I'm going to bring on our guest today, talk about chips and football and a whole bunch of other things. Blake, first things first, what is your favorite flavor of potato chip?
I'm gonna have to go with the classic cheddar. I actually got some right next to me. I won't put them on screen because I don't know who's sponsored or not, but definitely the cheddar potato chips for sure.
I don't know if we've got a chip sponsor. I guess we're open for business. If you have cheddar chips, you can get Blake anyway. Good call. Blake is probably best known. Blake Antkowiak is probably best known for Coogs Coverage on Instagram that has worked with recruiting and following the Houston Cougars with recruiting. Blake's going to help us break down a bunch of different things going on in Houston Cougar recruiting, including the impact of the Kansas basketball game last weekend, other news and notes from the springtime, and then that whole spring practice thing, because there's a lot of stuff going on there. And we actually have a spring game that we're all leading up to at some point in the very near future. But Blake, you were in the stadium. Before we get to what the potential Houston Cougars were thinking as they were in that stadium, how was it?
It was incredible. That was probably the best. I won't say probably. That was the best college basketball atmosphere I think I've ever experienced. I still am lucky enough to sit in the student section, and so being right on the floor. I mean, that was our best performance versus their worst performance, and I mean, it was just so loud. It was incredible. Most fun I've had at a game in a really long time.
Um, I think it's fascinating to watch how these two programs, the basketball and the football program, kind of help each other out, because I'll spend part of the fall talking about basketball recruits coming on campus for football games, and like people were at the TCU game, watch them build up to the Big 12 and stuff like that, and all right? In that same stadium with you were a lot of high school age kids who Houston would like to come play for them one day. First of all, can you tell me, like, in more like big picture stuff, how many kids? How big a size of event are we talking about?
It was about a dozen high school prospects. They might have snuck in a few more. The list I got was a dozen. Um, Big thing to note from that was I believe there were three or four offensive linemen, and that's kind of the measuring stick with a program is their ability to recruit offensive linemen. If you, I mean, that's where the biggest battles take place. Every single good offensive lineman it feels like goes to an SEC or Big Ten school. But we're going after him. Another guy that was there that's highly recruited was Jakori Watson. There are actually signs in the student section recruiting him to Houston, which I know had a pretty big effect on him. And so yeah, it was a successful visit by every means of defining it. And I think that was the perfect game you could bring a prospect to.
Well, and you mentioned Jakori. Jakori is from Pearland Shadow Creek. He's a high-end four-star wide receiver. Like, when I look at his numerical grade, I actually was surprised that was still a four-star, not a five-star. And Jakori comes from Shadow Creek, and Houston did very well in the class of 2024 with Shadow Creek. So I think obviously people are assuming and hoping that's going to carry over into 2025. Before I get to any more qualitative stuff about the visit and the weekend with Jakori, how would you describe Jakori as someone who pays a lot more attention to this?
Jakori's a real utility guy. Like last season, he actually played quarterback for Shadow Creek because they didn't have a true quarterback. And obviously, he's not going to do that in college. He's going to be playing wide receiver, but he runs very similarly to Barry Sanders, almost just really shifty. His lateral quickness is incredible. I mean, he's hard to tackle. He's very slippery. Um, yeah, as far as what, he could do here at Houston, he'd be a slot piece that would play almost right away, I feel like. Receiver is one of our deeper positions. You lose Matthew Golden, but even still, we have one of the better receiving cores in the Big 12, I'd say. That being said, Watson's a guy who could come in here and possibly make a year one impact. The only thing that might hinder him from that is his size. Not the biggest guy on the field by any means, but I think his speed makes up for that big time.
Listed at 5'10", 175 on most. I got a couple of things up right now. On most places I'm seeing that listed. Did you get to meet Jakori or any of the other recruits that were there? Also in student session, hopefully representing very well, I assume.
Yeah, I didn't get to talk to Jakori at the game, but I have talked to him before. Last year, whenever I went to a Shadow Creek game, he was a guy who was recruited by the previous staff, and that recruitment continued whenever Fritz and his team got here. But right in front of me, he took a photo with the student holding the sign that said "Stay Home Jakori," and the H had a U above it, making the UH logo. And he posted it on every social media platform he had. And I talked to Maurice Williams' dad about it too, because he was sitting by him and he noticed the sign. He was like, "That has my name on it. That's really, really cool." It's little stuff like that. It's like the student section absolutely has a hand in recruiting whenever they do stuff like that. And it's important for the players to know the fans really, really want them here. And he saw that. And Maurice Williams' dad even said he's doing everything he can to get him reunited with Mo Williams. So it made a big effect on him, and he's a guy that I feel good about where we stand in his battle going forward.
Well, and you mentioned Mo Williams. He and Zion Taylor both have kind of taken upon themselves to be like, hey, let's continue to make this a program for Houston. That was a big part of it when he committed. And pulling in his fellow Shadow Creek teammate would be a pretty big deal. For this segment, any other big Houston area kid that would kind of be in the same vein that was here over the weekend that you think like, oh man, like that's another kid from here for here that would kind of fit the mold that Mo Williams is trying to draw up?
Jordan Fields is one, and he's one of the offensive linemen I mentioned earlier. He's not currently ranked, but he absolutely will be. He already has several offers. He goes to North Shore, which, if you followed UH recruiting, you've heard North Shore a million times. It's one of the bigger pipelines to UH. We had Smith Orogbo. Trying to remember how to pronounce his last name, from Leaf Hastings here. He's a 4-star guy. Another guy who is being heavily recruited by pretty much everyone around here. But most of the prospects we've brought in, really dating back to when Fritz first stepped foot on campus, have been Houston guys. Even that 24 class that he hodgepodge together over the span of probably a month. You can tell Houston the Houston area is a priority for Willie Fritz, especially the higher rated guys like Smith or Robo.
Well, and I want to talk more about Lyman in a second, the second segment. So I'm going to hold that for then. But I feel like it's the only program that bluntly wears Houston across its chest in a weird way, right? Like Texas is like, man, but like Austin and Dallas, and that's all a lot of different stuff, right? And frankly, like Texas A&M, like they wear Texas as well, I guess, in a weird way, but it's also a very different kind of vibe. LSU will come in and poach kids. Alabama will come in and poach kids. But Houston's got an interesting culture in the way that it maintains kids and being from the city, for the city. Like the basketball program's hashtag, I mean, for the city, right? Did you feel like, in Jakori's case, because he is such a talented young kid, did you feel like the game had a positive sway on him or anyone else worth noting?
Absolutely, and I was talking about this a little while ago. UH basketball is sort of the ceiling for UH athletics, and it shows the potential that's there. And that was I believe over capacity, yet again. Several standing room only tickets sold, and the atmosphere, like I said a few times already, the atmosphere was just incredible. And seeing that visual is really important because you want to know you're playing for a school that has fan interest. You want people showing up to your games, and you want to be playing for a contender. And this shows what football can be given the right staff in charge. And Willie Fritz absolutely brings that along with him. So I think not just seeing the atmosphere, but also seeing how well the basketball team played. And another important visual, cutting down the nets. A Big 12 championship was won in front of several highly rated prospects and a number of other guys who will be rated highly soon. That's an important visual. We've been here for 1 year and we're already cutting down nets, winning trophies in important sports. I mean, behind football, basketball is, the 1B of college athletics, and we won the conference in front of Jakori Watson may be the top priority in this class going forward. And we cut down nets in front of him and hoisted a trophy. And I think that's an important visual, as well as all the other stuff like the crowd and, the celebrities that came to the game. And, Nance's not jersey retirement, he never wore a
But
jersey, but his
same thing.
banner
Yeah.
being put up. Yeah. All of that's so important. And it was a spectacle. I mean, it was the place to be in Houston that day. And I think that really sent a message and stuck with everybody there.
Well, and I would point out too that the Big 12, you mentioned it's like basketball is 1B in terms of revenue sports across most campuses. The Big 12, it might be 1A. I mean, it is the best basketball conference in America. Houston won it in a dominating fashion, frankly, won it by 2 games, average margin of victory of over 10 points. And again, was cutting down nets, but we knew we were cutting down nets on Saturday, right? That thing was
Yeah.
organized.
Yeah.
And so I would point out, like you're saying, like the ceiling, it's not like we're setting a low ceiling for the program. The ceiling for the football program being number 1 in America, winning the conference would be pretty nice. Right? That's it can't be much higher than that. There are some big people that are going to be playing a big role in that. I want to start off talking about them in the second segment. But first, if you're trying to push things a little further, like Houston Cougar football recruiting is these days, you got to make sure you go check out our friends over at Nissan. Because if you ever have wondered what adventure could be like around that next corner, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to that next level. The Nissan Rogue is a perfect car for city drives and great escapes. Classic exclusive Google is built in, and it's always updating assistant for anything you need. No longer need to connect your phone. That's a thing of the past. In 2024, 5, and beyond, the Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store are all built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen entertainment system. It's also called an infotainment system, I'm being told there. Combination of words. I'm not great with that. 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Take Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go find your next adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, so linemen, you're talking my language. That's a thing that, frankly, I felt like I liked the kids we had on the team last year, but it looked like the part that made us the most like group of 5 team in a Power 5 conference a year ago, right? Like Pat Paul will be a top 10 pick, and we still gave up a bunch of sacks, a bunch of pressure, and a trouble running the football, right? Like that's top 10 pick maybe, but he'll be a high end tackle taken, right? Talk me through who from the lineman group was on campus this weekend. You mentioned a couple names, and then I want to talk about what those guys do and what those guys can bring to the program.
Yeah, the offensive line, I tend to be pretty positive in my coverage with UH sports, but that is the one area I am pretty worried about this season. I mean, you lose Jack Freeman, you lose, like you mentioned, Patrick Paul, Tank Jenkins comes back, which is good. However, it's absolutely the place you'll see targeted most in the portal whenever that reopens. And you already saw it a little bit with Cedric Milton coming over from Ole Miss. As far as high school goes, Devin Ferris out of Heights High School was in town. Not yet rated guy. I think minimum he'll be a 3-star. And on top of him, RJ Lee from Second Baptist, another guy who will be rated. I hate saying these guys aren't rated yet because they will be. These guys all have offers. I don't have those pulled up right now, but like I said, Jordan Fields from North Shore, he's the guy I'll be going out to see this fall. Yeah, three offensive linemen. I would say you're in that group. You've got Jordan Fields, a 3-star likely. You've got RJ Lee, possibly a 4-star, and then Devin Ferris, probably a high 3-star, maybe sneak into that 4-star range. So 3 guys who could come in and play right away. You don't really know for sure how that is going to fall because of transfers. Feel like offensive line is kind of the area you see transfers being most impactful nowadays, immediately. But either way, it's important that you win those battles for guys in Houston to sort of set a precedent. It is cool come to Houston. Kelvin Sampson was talking about that today before. He really started getting the ball rolling. It wasn't cool to come to Houston, and I feel like we may be in that phase a little bit right now before Willie Fritz gets the ball rolling, but eventually we will be there, and these guys would be a great start.
All right, I want to talk about, you mentioned like the idea of transfers, and I have theories and hypotheses. I want to talk through those as well. But RJ Lee from Second Baptist in Houston is listed at 6'9", 330. After the injury to JoJo Tucker, I got asked, can he also hoop? Do we have any idea?
I can't confirm or deny that, but you never know.
6'9", 330. Like at 6'9", 330 is not even all that heavy. Like that's a big man. That's a big man playing senior in high school football next year. Anyway, I'm seeing places that have Houston in a battle with Texas Tech for him, being from Second Baptist. The way that the staff is recruiting the city of Houston, I would hope that plays a pretty key role in him. All these guys, though, you mentioned the transfer portal can be huge for linemen. JUCOs can be huge for linemen because, truthfully, even at 6'9", 330, going from high school football to Big 12 football can be a gigantic learning curve for the lineman as much as anyone, right? I mean, you're going from being the largest person in the field to being just another dude over 300 pounds, right? Big changes for a lot, even at North Shore. I mean, even at big time programs, big changes for these guys. Are you seeing an increase in high school recruits? Is that going to take a couple years to turn into something? What are you seeing the staff and how they're recruiting linemen right now? Because I see benefits of going out and getting JUCO and transfer guys because they're like physically mature enough to play right now, and we just lost so many starters, like you said. But also, like, in building a program and setting a culture, you kind of want to get some, like, I don't know, untainted is one thing I thought of, but I don't mean to say that guys transferring are tainted somehow. Like fresh faces, like guys you can mold. What do you see the staff doing right now?
Yeah, I can't remember when it was. Our junior day, I believe that was a little over a month and a half ago. We brought in 32 guys, I think, and almost half of them were offensive linemen. So that is, Emmanuel Ngavi was with Willie Fritz at Tulane, left a year early, and now has been retained at U of H. He's our offensive line coach, and they have gone after offensive linemen in high school. I don't think you'll ever see, unless we make a splash and just get a 4 or 5 star guy. I don't think you'll really see offensive linemen come in and play right away. All of them have been projects so far. And I feel like the holes that we have in the offensive line will be plugged with either, backups from last year or, like I said earlier, transfers. Cedric Melton's a big part of that. He was taking reps at tackle during spring ball. And I believe he played guard at Ole Miss, so we've slid him over. I think he's gonna play a key role. Peyton Dunn also was a backup last year. He's playing guard. He's gonna play a big role. So as far as recruiting goes, they're gonna get the guys in. They're going to go after offensive linemen with a sense of urgency for sure. But you probably won't see these guys come in and play from day one because that, like you talked about, that's kind of the area that separates each division of football. Deion Sanders kind of talked about that when he was at Jackson State. He said, "My skill players are among the best in the country, but we're not ready for a jump from FCS if they were to do that before he left for Colorado because of the trenches." And you kind of saw that play out in Boulder this year. You had Travis Hunter, who was one of the best players in the country. Shadur, who was great. Their offensive line was not Power 5 caliber. It's kind of the same thing you saw with Houston's jump. Our skill positions, I would argue, were pretty good. Tight end was an area of concern. The wide receiver was great. Donovan was pretty good. Running back was great, but the trenches is where we kind of fell flat. And that's, again, my concern coming into this year, candidly. So we'll see. I think, again, that's why you see us specifically going after transfers because you want guys with experience. You're bringing in still, 3-star offensive linemen. You don't want to throw them to the wolves right away because they're not. Again, you're not in the American anymore. You can't really get away with that as much. So you want to protect Donovan. You want to give him the time he needs, and transfers are typically the best way to do that.
And I would agree. I would agree on all points there. I would only ask as a follow up. Offensive line is one side of the trenches. The defensive side has not necessarily been. Defensive line has not been a problem for Houston. They typically found a good edge rusher. Sac Ave had a culture of its own. And I, frankly, was trying to illustrate well for people that listened to this show last fall how they could give up a lot of yards rushing, but it really wasn't the 4 down or 3 down at times defense lineman's fault always as much as guys filling in gaps behind or next to them. Um, what have you seen from defensive linemen on campus? Is that a tradition that continues? Is it a cultural shift? Obviously, Brian Early leaving changes some things up when we didn't think that was going to there for a hot second. What have you seen out of the defensive big guys?
Yeah, losing Brian early again. I try to be as positive as I can, but that is a really tough loss. He was. We had players calling for him to be the head coach at a time, so losing him absolutely hurts. However, speaking of the visit we just had, Sheldon Rice was a three-star defensive lineman on campus for that game. We're bringing in more defensive linemen. That's also a area we've targeted pretty heavily. Um, that again, like you said, that's the other half of the trenches. That's what separates people. And we'll talk about this a little bit more whenever we get to spring ball, but I 100% agree. Linebackers were absolutely the problem in the run game last year. However, defensive line, it still wasn't where it needs to be in order to compete for a Big 12 title, like most position groups. And I think that's why you've seen it kind of targeted in high school recruiting. Smith Orogbo also 4-star defensive end on campus during the Houston game. That's a guy who it's a little bit more of a long shot in the recruiting battles we've had. However, like we were talking about, that visit can do wonderful things. So it's absolutely, again, the trenches as a whole have been a major priority. I think the staff knows where we stand as far as skill positions. They're fine. They've been pretty good. We're continuing to recruit them, obviously, but the emphasis is clearly on offensive and defensive line.
Well, I want to talk about some of those guys that are on campus in spring practice, and maybe guys that can fix that problem by this fall in a second. But first, it is March, and as it's March, are a lot of people having a lot of fun putting a lot of emphasis on a lot of games. Like right now, I got St. Mary's and Santa Clara on over here, and honestly, Santa Clara looks like they're playing in a different league. But if you are making March more interesting, go over to FanDuel.com. It's a layup. It's super easy. You put $5 down, get $150 back in bonus bets if that $5 bet hits. You want an easy one? Houston win the Big 12 Conference Tournament at plus 100 right now. Houston on their way to the Final Four at plus 135. That's dangerously close to just even money just to make it to the Final Four, which seems odd, right? Anyway, Houston to win the whole thing is at plus 650. All kinds of fun things and parlays and individual games and stuff like that as well on FanDuel. So go check out FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook right now. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, so Blake, you're on campus a lot, obviously as a student, but on campus a lot, particularly looking at athletics. Talk me through what you've seen this spring, energy, mojo, differences, exciting things. What's got you going in spring practice so far?
I think the regimented style of this new staff is really important. Obviously, it's football. It gets scrappy at times, but every single time, guys mix it up. It's immediate up downs, and then at the end of the practice, they come back together. They mix the crowd up, and they sort of squash the beef. Everybody on the field really wants to win. It's competitive. It's competition all the time. And every single time so when they get to 11 on 11, they separate offense on one sideline, defense on the other sideline. And every time defense makes a play, they have to hold the guys off the field because they're going so crazy. Same with offense. It's a competitive environment. Everybody wants to win, but it's controlled. Another interesting thing is there's no music this year. There's no music playing throughout the entire practice. That's been a theme for the past few staffs, not just Holgerson's staff, but everyone before that as well. Not everyone, but a few in a row have done that. No music this time. It's a really focused environment. And Willie Fritz is just moving all the time. He's not staying still. He's not staying in one position group. He's moving. He'll tell one guy something here, and then he'll move on to the next position group and do the same thing. It's really high energy, and it's competitive, and it's honestly, like, as a football fan, media stuff aside, it's just fun to watch. That's why I'd encourage anybody who can make it to the spring game to do so you can get a piece of that.
Well, and Obviously, I think there are a lot of people that are welcoming change and difference. I will say though, I think the more encouraging thing to me is there was this theory that, how long can Willie Fritz do this for? He was one of the older candidates that was being considered theoretically, at least by the masses. And I was like, is this really the right guy to rebuild a program? He's rebuilt so many things before this. And it sounds like he's like the energy, right? It's kind of the opposite, right? The opposite of what you would have thought with that. Outside of Fritz himself, who else has stood out to you in the spring? Who else stands out as like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see this guy put him on for real this fall?
I think the absolute clear answer for me is Latrell McCutcheon. This guy just looks incredible in spring ball. And I followed all my family are OU fans, so I followed that program pretty close. He was at OU originally, that's where he committed, and then he followed Lincoln Riley to USC. So he's been at two schools already, but he's only been with one staff, and that staff was just not a home for him. He didn't fit in their schemes, and so he really didn't see a whole lot of burn. This year, from what we've seen in spring ball, I mean, he goes up against Boogie Johnson all the time, and it's a war every single time. He's a scrappy guy. He makes a play and he gets up and he lets you know he made a play. He's just unbelievable in man coverage. And I'm really excited to get to see him because he was a guy that I figured would transfer because he was a Holgerson guy. He transferred in to play under Holgerson, and so when he departed, I figured, okay, McCutcheon brothers are probably hitting the portal, but they both stuck around and they're both making plays all over the field. Latravion's another guy to look out for. Both of them will have a pretty significant impact on the defense this year. Latravion, we got to see a little bit at the start of the season. I believe he redshirted last year, if I'm not mistaken. He didn't play a whole lot to the end of the season, but he's a guy who will help out the linebacker core quite a bit. As
Oh,
far as linebackers go, Corey Platt Jr. is massive. He's a guy. He's a guy. We've kind of talked about it this episode and last time I was on how linebackers were a real point of concern last year. They just were, you can call a spade a spade. They just were not good last year. Corey Platt Jr. comes in and immediately from day one changes that. He's a guy who could have gone to an SEC school and played right away. And he decided to follow Fritz, and I'm glad he did because he's going to be maybe not vocally the number one leader. Jamal Morris returns, but on field play wise, he's going to be by far our best linebacker, possibly our best defensive player.
well, and obviously he's a guy that was new. Last year, the Travian, it did feel like the same kind of learning curve we talked about with linemen, that he kind of had to go through the same thing, and they said to redshirt him. They redshirted most freshmen last season, actually, and I thought 2023 was a pretty strong class, and then very few of them got to play, which was an interesting move, especially in hindsight. The staff gets let go. It's like maybe they should have played those guys and like gave themselves a chance or something. I don't know. I don't know that would have fixed things. Who knows, right? Um, with Latrell McCutcheon coming in, you said he can keep it with Boogie, which implies he's really fast, right? Um, DBs, Houston's kind of got this quiet thing where there are a couple of those guys in the pros now. How does the secondary look? Fritz, I think, fancies himself more of a defensive guy if he had to pick. If you go back and look at his resume, that's the side of the ball he spent the most time on. And in the Big 12, you kind of have to have safeties that can fill in the run and safeties that can cover in the pass game. Not that McCutcheon's a safety. I believe he's an outside corner, right? But what do you see out of the secondary in those guys? Can they play both? Can they really be multi-level?
Yeah, I think as far as the secondary goes, that's kind of the unit to watch for me on defense. Not so much in a like I have question marks about them, just because I think they're going to be our best unit on defense by far. Isaiah Hamilton returns and he's looked great. He's probably going to be our second corner, with Latrell being number one. One guy I want to bring up though is Adari Halsey. He looked fantastic last year. I said it a few times. I thought he was the bright spot on defense most games. And he comes back and he's a thumper, man. He just like you're not supposed to hit in spring ball, and he does it anyways. Like he's flying around the field and he looks really good. Another guy is Kentrell Webb, who transferred over from Tulane. He's also looked good. And one guy I want to give a quick shout out to is Noah Guzman. He got injured last year. He's back.
Mhm.
He's moving around good. I believe it was the Rice game. He had a season-ending injury. And so he comes back for one last year. He'll be fun to watch. Probably won't start, but will contribute. As far as the pro potential of the secondary, I think Latrell obviously needs to put on size. He's not a very big corner, but he's a guy you could see on an NFL roster eventually. Same with Isaiah Hamilton. He was a guy who entered the portal and came back out of it. The secondary is in much better shape than it was last year, I think, just by virtue of bringing the guys you wanted to bring back. Pretty much everybody who was starting at the end of the season returns, and then you plug in holes with guys like Kentrell Webb. I'm excited to see what the secondary does.
Last thing before we get out of here, what has been, you mentioned energy, regimen, discipline, but you're also around talking with other media folks. There's a handful of people at practices. What has been the talk amongst those folks at each one of these? I mean, y'all have conversations, you're human beings. What are y'all talking about?
I think the big thing is you might have seen it by now, but on the back of Willie Fritz's shirt every day it says "Play through the whistle," and that's not just a design choice. Like that's how every facet of practices run. Like every single time a drill ends, they have a line to sprint through. It's very detail oriented, and I think that's the thing we've talked about most is how the devil's in the details, and Willie Fritz knows that, and he's really. You can tell everything has a purpose with this practice schedule. And I think whenever it's one thing to see that message on a shirt, and my Rob Sellers, my boss, tweeted this out not too long ago. It's one thing to see play through the whistle on a shirt. It's another thing to see that emphasized from start to finish of practice. And like I said, when they get to 11 on 11, one play, Adari Halsey came down and laid the boom on somebody, and he gets up and he runs to the end zone. It's not a there's no feeling sorry for yourself. You drop a pass, you go pick it up and you sprint back. It's like effort is there's not a lot of slack given. Like it's you have to be giving 100% or you're going to get chewed out. Like that's just how Willie Fritz is. And I think that's the sort of accountability and discipline you need to be successful long term. And I think that's what you build on. That's what you win championships starting in the spring. And I think the whole play through the whistle thing is a good foundation for that.
Blake, you're covering it all the time, doing a very good job of doing it. You're at Blake Antkowiak on X. I was about to say Twitter, on X, at Coogs Coverage on Instagram. What you got coming out lately? What kind of content's been coming out from the Blake accounts, plural, across all platforms?
Twitter, a lot of it is that spring ball coverage. They're off for spring break, but starting back next week, at least twice a week, I'll be out there. So if you want to see videos from spring ball practice, random notes, if you want to stay up to date with that, that's a good place to follow me. Instagram, I'm mainly covering the basketball team right now, especially with March coming up. That's where a lot of my opinionated stuff goes out. So yeah, if you want spring ball coverage, recruiting coverage, just coverage of the teams we have right now, feel free to follow me on all platforms.
Again, that's Blake Antkowiak on X, at Coogs Coverage on Instagram for a little bit more spice, fun, flavor. I'll let you describe it how you want it once you've seen it. That's Blake Antkowiak. Blake, thank you for coming on again, man.
For sure. Thank you for having me.
Go Cougs.